Hello, America. Hello, Connecticut. Hello, Weathersfield. There's an identity theft slash fraud slash slander method, sickly distinctly against each person, and our founders left us to demonstrate this. For example, not all knowledge has been used to get over on correlation nature by the defenders of the sciences, as is abridged as victims, but as victims that reacted to it and are reacting to it, a breaching method that is inseparable from many of our questions the same way. Also, simultaneously, the value of the simultaneous and the value of what is hyper simultaneous is also inseparable from all our questions, in all cases. And it's how variably and how constantly to itself, and how, with exceptions that are only partially exceptions and demonstrations, the same thing too, which simultaneously, as we'll examine, is why and how it wants and needs our syntax nature to understand how it is exception nature. And a breaching method had the sophistication, memory of the ancients method by uses of this, more functional and more to and as what is the order of the finite and what is the value of the order of the finite, distinctly and non-distinctly increasingly both ways. And the value of that is increasing too. And relative to where and how it is discernible, invisible but discernible. So American cities, suburbs, and rural and exception nature, streets, which cold, what heats, which seeks to warm through this method, that breaching method that would only let natures of warmth, that would be criminal insidious natures of warmth, criminal insidious natures of positive treatments, relative to what black and white, for example, was forced by that breaching method against every single person. And our founding parents wanted us to know. They wanted their nature, their identity, wanted nothing to do with slavery. They wanted they wanted the Constitution unabridged. You know that because you're an individual. You want and need the Constitution unabridged. You want and need that identity theft, fraud, slander against them and against you, sickly, distinctly, against everybody else. Everyone wants it and needs it gone. And replace that simultaneously changes the nature of everything. That simultaneously reveals the shared nature of relationship to itself, and its identity of relationship to itself. How really to make positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures, instability. For example, that would per what is greater than and more finite than, while as the variables of economic stability. For the experts on that recorded self, in other words, brilliant people. But everyone left and leaves out because they had replaced the short words and revelations. Everyone left and leaves out the exception nature regarding precedents in statutes, formal and informal, where we are syntax nature, where we are function, where we have to speak about values. And we have that breaching method of laws relative to everything that was manifest, every instance recording. See, we have those recordings still by victims of the child abuse method, self-valued, being in heaven, being criminally foreign influenced, hyper-tactically, and then tactically through our own. And those motivations too. Its motivations. It knew what nature would demonstrate. So to keep itself too from being demonstrated, undiscerned, how non-distinctly and distinctly roles with everyone distinctly hurting each other. The breaching method and motivations, natures, needs, interests of strangers and the people that you know. And just say that you know. This has each identity of volume of branch of government, of overt criminal enterprise, of private criminal enterprises, of ones legalized. Note self-value legalized, because this is where and how we are a value progression as an identity. As identities, actual volume science, which uses why and how. It is hyper-evidential that nature communicates by showing us the value of how the body of the species as an identity of relationship to itself, and the value of that are increasing perfectly, distinctly from how, and non-distinctly from how, and simultaneously from how, while hyper-simultaneously from how. Our individual body /S, part that species body, part our own. And group bodies. See, group bodies lose the ability to handle short words and revelations by the order of finite individuals. Only individuals can speak for finite. Groups only have a strength to speak for the denial of finite. So they only have strength to be positive or negative. If they're not valuing the individual voices first, which note both Mr. Kaepernick weren't and isn't, and the presidents, and they have their own excuses. And that's true. They're good excuses. But what is not good about everyone's excuses is where and how you leave out how the exception nature. Where and how even the slightest instances can be used to trace back to the breaching method. Really, what, so this is volume science. This is about, we use science, not theory. Science, see, but the theory, they have each age of the sophistication / non-sophistication, bound by nature. And then further, this is also where and how the countries individually grouped in together. That species identity of body. In other words, one part of your body, another part of your body, they're not even touching each other, not even near each other, but they share an identity. And they share that identity being present where their physical body is not. Vaccine gets hot or cold. And warmth. See, anything that is invisible but discernible can only be used, in other words, is not the hyper invisible. The hyper invisible, but still discernible, can only be observed through the observations at the finite level, individual level. Fact, attribute, nature, quality, capability of being. And regarding acts, criminal acts caused by that breaching method. So writing into, even you can't criminally legalize slavery regarding this the electrical engineering of language, of our human nature, of its volume science. Nature is an identity of relationship to positive and negative simultaneously. Nature is a relationship, as value is a relationship to positive and negative simultaneously, as part of of nature's complete, greater than our own and more finite than our own, distinctly, but as its non-distinct way simultaneously, as our value, and as its perfect increase, automatically temporary positive. Temporary positive, generating more and more positive or negative. Positive that is onto its complete. So in other words, it wants us and needs us to understand what criminal insidiousness. It needs and wants in us. Nature reveals science. Actually, honest science reveals that criminal insidiousness is an identity of relationship to itself. That the electrical engineering of our of the syntax nature of the sounds of our language, for example, have to themselves, and our nature has to itself. You can't legalize that, or nature will demonstrate you are on systems other than this perfect value progression system. Perfect. It only perfect value increase, and it's only going to stay positive onto itself. Here, like the rest of space nature with no criminal foreign influences, a positive making more forever nature also positive onto itself, while as itself. So it wants and needs us to understand. It shows us what identity is about, tied to positive and negative. But it shows us some of the, also with American history, but we have other replaced. See, the sciences individually grouped and together were made self-valued, abridged, because there was a remote possession of uses of that. Because there is a U/S of that by the breaching method that stayed undiscerned. That had and has motivations that increasingly have to stay undiscerned. So they have to stay cloaked, apparently through others. Need other people to motivations, nature needs others to pretend, and need to pretend or self-value others pretending and having pretended illusions. One of the things predicate acts are, one of the things identity thefts and frauds are, and slanders are illusions. One of the things are that forced it on everyone, and no one could counter it because everyone was made a fact cheaping nature quality that can't defend itself and counter the quality of fact cheaping nature. That took complete possession and maintained complete possession through our own, which now itself, here and there, countries A through Z, they never had a free identity. So I don't know. They did some kind. They have a whole bunch of people that were tied to a Taekwondo place that is right near where the Wethersfield Police Department is now. They're involved with them, with the officers been forging and switching names for years, involved with identity thefts and frauds, falsified police reports, and with they forced the principal child abuser with more then and now. They hid the confessions. They made fake emails. They've been using Connecticut News remotely for their own purposes, and other people have. So there is something to do with a sixth grade class I had with people. And the other class I had, in other words, I don't even the people that did the bad things, the people I don't know, who want and need to pretend passions and emotions because they pretended other, and like they made an exception to pretend other. So I would say truth. I know them from that, but they were pretending there was something before that, and God knows they lied about that into the databases. like a Debbie Gold, a daughter of a former Mayor Gold, with the campus was more then and now involved with the various natures of distinct natures of child abuses too, because that's also relevant because they were recorded simultaneous uses of that at the other locations. It's like elderly homes. It's relevant to where and how there has been remote possession of like groups of people that investigations and investigators have been positing in as arrays in collusion with that which is differentially criminally foreign influence too, because it began and stays what used all identity ground locations for its identity of relate it our uses of its identity of relationship to ourselves as its identities, reliant upon its what it entertained, needs what it provided, means and needs to blame on other things, others, and or on themselves. The real causes of negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. Like, for example, for real reasons, but constantly was made up on top of that. And no one was realizing that. Everyone realized that their education was being sabotaged and taken away. And they were blaming it on the right things. Again, too, and made up signs. In other words, they're using time simultaneously too fast, too slow with CRT treatments, critical race theory treatments at schools per Fox News and per the branch of the government. And they will say other, but they record and communicate other than they. In other words, they have roles originally still as their roles with the victim predators A through Z, with the narratives in the way of what the real answer /S is, what they are is /R, because they are self-generated, but that which is actually the value of the simultaneously, that is actually positive onto itself, its system that is native pure. And so that was made self-valued, having been denied. Because now nature greater than and more finite than even that is going to demonstrate negative value nature progressions, acts, nature, the sciences it revealed, the method it revealed, conjunctively to and as. An identity of relativity also increasingly tied to our fact-keeping nature at all locations, our name treatments. Simultaneously, every time we make positive or negative treatments, or we make name treatments, we're making positive and negative treatments. Make positive name treatments. But now it's through systems all other than the one that works with the ground too. The same way, but then further as the ground, as its identity of relationship to itself, the water. What's deep, what's shallow, what's positive about that, what's negative about that. You know, everything is a landscape theater. Everybody has means to make positives that are all fact-keeping nature quality reliant upon leaning on experts and the value of that. Not by accident, abridged sciences are only standing, identity of the ground, relationship to. So we have the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. For example, and the first part of the Old Testament says that all people have to understand is right up to right here where it says, Also, in other words, the sciences the people of the sciences are going to come together. It's cipher slash and decipher. It's about how the sciences share an identity of relativity, individually grouped and together, as the extent of it we could discern, and while as it, but distinctly. So we could see its a distinct, non-distinct, and simultaneous relationship to itself as space slash existence. But this is a definition of space that includes the definition of space that has space that is not juxtaposed with matter, space that is juxtaposed with matter. The same, you know, a semi slash complete and or a sequential slash simultaneous relationship to itself, the hyper simultaneous. It is also necessary to discern the hyper simultaneous relative to value, the value of why and how species are manifest as species, and so why and how humanity is manifest as humanity. I heard Brother Trump's carnival barking at his rally. I couldn't watch more than 2 minutes. See, but people misunderstand about Trump because people are misunderstanding. There's a thing called there's a criminal insidiousness is a legal term. For example, and so we never had, in other words, Robert Frost is an American poet, for example. He lived 1874 through 1963. So 1860, the Civil War was 1860, around 1860 to 1865. The Civil War was manifest. And so 9 years after that, an 89-year-old, a guy who would live to 89 was born, and his life was ended in the 60s. So in other words, and we still have campuses that are telling other to keep hid with the breaching method and rolls with it figured out before we did, that our founders left us to figure out. For example, about how they had to counter extort the other founders to make the Declaration of Independence, to make other narratives for what really brought them to make the Constitutional Convention and to say that we should get the Constitution unabridged. They have an identity theft / fraud that each party hurts the other party's voices with, as our human volume science, as systems other, but making positive and negative treatments so increasingly incapable of handling the significance of a quality of fact human nature that could counter criminal insidiousness that is of the source. That was the breaching method that was sophistication before England was sophistication. In other words, they don't remember the history of English properly themselves because everyone's education was taken over, entertained, forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, entertained, criminally foreign influence, abridged constitution grounding roles with means to screen the reality of that because of uses of it at all locations, with all instances, uses of the natures of everybody as criminal insidiousness that can't be legalized. Even though they could legalize it, nature's going to keep demonstrating it. So theory is about how theories are trained, practical, because on a mass scale, they built to have replaced, to have, again, in other words, they attach everyone to an identity theft slash fraud slash slander method. That everyone's self-value rolls without at all locations. And it knew that other locations would have to, when it was sustaining that breaching method, it already sustained and now is still sustaining sickly distinctly with the colonies implanted themselves, the possession of countries themselves already possessed by criminally, by entertaining through defenses of themselves, increasingly self-valuing abridged sciences from their ancient source, from the ancient method that goes before it was criminally foreign influence. It uses what is simultaneous. It allows free speech to use what is hyper-evidential. So in other words, roles with slavery left entrenched, it backed them into logic the same way they backed the overt criminal enterprises into logic, and keep them needing with the courts that put them away and with the prisons that put them away and their family members and their friends at locations, kept needing to hide the same sequence shifts, final act of progressive lies, identity theft and fraud roles, nature's needs and styles. And so the people that we have all identity theft, frauds, slanders, natures as the identity of the people speaking for the law, because that's all that was told to them. We have a certain kind of victim predator that is manifest in country A through Z. And simultaneously, everyone, because they're relevant to how they blame other things, others, themselves, for what really is involved with and is exploiting the involvements with at the youngest ages and at each age of campus, even ones unconnected too, and homeschooled. Each age of correlation nature at each location is a means by correlation. In other words, there are means to discern an invisible but still discernible breaching method relevant to when someone brings up a subject like slavery. But people can't discern that because they had other replaced, formally, forced, where we were supposed to force education, not identity theft, fraud, slander roles. And that method that had that against, that was sickly against our founding parents and against colonists A through Z. It had made, and it was still further going, dividing Native Americans A through Z. Because and everyone's trying to remember what the ancients and the science really is. Our nature really wants to say, remember. And then that's what it is. American history is about how a whole bunch of countries that had already had they've been forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, taken as shock and awe to states of defenses of themselves, reliant upon groupings of countries, how we are grouped and how we are a species identity of volume, now tactically ulterior from that. And so the breaching method knew that nature would keep demonstrating that, how our countries are grouped. In other words, it has every country and how every group is manifest already one way and is only increasing value. And when we try to do other, it demonstrates it by pushing that value from here. As exceptions only in demonstration of the same thing. Lethal Hadith, force, space, nature, transfer. Per me, I didn't read that. That's what I think the ancient, in other words, the ancients would even know that hyperpantheism and pantheism go together. In other words, if the ancients, we were like the ancients, we would speak of, if we were speaking about religion, we will be knowing that hyper religion could only be interpreted, goes with it, and that's only what can be interpreted by an individual using contemplation, using the value of the order of the finite, how it is distinct from the value of the order of what is active, and how simultaneously it is those orders simultaneously as one order. In other words, five identities of say sequence slash simultaneous nature have an identity of relationship to themselves that is self-generating. One identity of hyper simultaneous nature as simultaneously as forever nature, distinctly we can see we can see it is constantly those two things, those three things. For example, it is forever nature, that which is greater than and more finite than, while as the value of what is space slash existence. It is simultaneously an identity as, therefore a nature as, simultaneous nature, is simultaneously a sequence nature. This is relative to where and how we are individual grouped and species body bound. An independent, excuse me, independent individual. So it is round. So, in other words, theory is about. Theory is about how they put theory, like the theory of evolution, relative to where and how there is the worst and obfuscation of that quality of fact, human nature, needed to counter or to explain or to understand why and how actually black was put with the law. For example, and slavery, and where and how they had it to measured locations, and where and how they had it was the laws about how they had witch trials too, and they never brought up slavery simultaneously. That is also evidence. It showed and shows in nature, and that also speaks about its motivations, defends why it spoke about things like that, or fights about it. That is also evidences. That is exactly the way the breaching method wanted it needs. So, for example, there is a I don't know Mr. Zuckerberg but there's a woman big up with Facebook, I guess, or associated with Mr. Zuckerberg, or she looks like that woman, who Celeste Wells. I don't know her. People when I was in middle school who were in other classes, they weren't in my classes. They were involved with, through which is relevant intercampuses. They've been what I call them doing intercities too, with spots next to the campuses intercity. But it is also where and how it's by the breaching method that everyone missed. So, but they've been switching names and forging names and pretending motivations and backgrounds and trying to make fake exception nature. They've been influencing the news media to hide this for themselves. I also individually grouped it together to pretend other motivations, nature's needs, interests, because they've been involved, everyone, without locations, identity theft, fraud, slanders, for that method and uses of it. So that was tied to all kinds of natures of things in it, where people make positive treatments and negative treatments that are both criminal insidiousness nature. You know, there are means to make criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments, or of identity treatments, of negative treatment. In other words, pretend that someone's speaking for the law when they're entertaining what was only allowed to be entertained. But in other words, there was a breaching method entrenched. It was a function /S, and the /S was self-valued, how it was one function that was hurting everyone, was self-valuing how to keep it going, because they were self-valuing roles, blaming other things, others, themselves, and defending themselves, and that by valuing the logic to countries individually grouped and together, now tactical terror from how actually present. Countries A through Z, their identities are here as each, as ye. Whoever hears this, not you, Raphael. So, in other words, we need more than criminal protection. We need reliefs. See, but no one had. They had to blame and get everyone else to blame other things, others, ourselves. In other words, in our responses, we have to be very careful because that was all employed. The responses to the breaching method, because in other words, it was effectively employed to keep and having kept those short words and revelations that come from understanding what our founding parents left us to understand about how they had to hide what they were going to do and what they really thought and would entertain. That was already too entrenched. Native Americans A through Z, they were already fighting with themselves. And let alone crazy colonists fighting with themselves. Everyone's, and then now they're a country. And that was because they were counter-extorted. Our founders. There are revelations with that. This shows everyone with passions and emotions pretending other, using and having used the most knowledge, having called themselves experts, as nature's is actually recorded, offensively affronts to individual voices who want and need to use short words properly, who want and need to have a calm means to defend ourselves verbally, and or needs aggressively verbally to defend ourselves. They also prevent this by attaching us to fake behavior and fake speaking meekly and fake speaking aggressively at different locations and databases relative to the sense and sensibilities of where and how the branches of government, each individually grouped and together, they are differentially, so increasingly not wanting to be, but increasingly differentially, criminally foreign influence, and uses of it itself used by a breaching method, and their motivations for that and defenses of it. This was sophistication here. Since they were little kids on their campuses, it was attaching them to roles with the identity theft /fraud /slander method that is against each sickly distinctly. But again, each already self-valued roles with it, and that is manifest in what is actually being and having been recorded. So Wethersfield police have roles fabricating Facebook pages through time, as the roles with the extortion of me since I was a little kid, and with the FBI, a former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and his co-defendants in a 2006 part of a district court case /S that was ongoing at the time of my father's death, they're also involved with people associated with that, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with a medical community with various campuses, intercities connections, and Hartford Hospital, involved with planting evidences at locations and campuses relevant to the identity theft, fraud, slander method against everyone, and relative to what is hypersyntactic. There is a hypersyntactical conjunction to where and how we are supposed to use words like value and like identity. And so that has prevented free speech and the quality of fact, human nature at all locations to defend that while pretending other. And that is hyper evidential. So we have to be allowed to use what is hyper evidential. And so people they have a method of pretending they are Darth Vader, the executive branch and private police tied to them, and the judicial branch and their family members, and because of their roles with a whole bunch of other countries at the locations they have roles doing this with, like next to Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. There are people associated with identity theft, fraud, slanders, intercities through time connected, on and off campuses connected, inter-campuses and intra-campuses. It makes self-valued roles with lie progressions tied to where and how consciously the breaching method knew effectively it could get and keep the branches of government's family members and the overt criminal enterprises family members and the private criminal enterprises family members. And worse, roles with that having been sustained as inherent to the styles of fact treatment, positive and negative treatments. Oh, this is religion. This is what this means. This is guns. This is what this means. This is freedom of speech. This is what this means. Aims. Look through our teams. Species body calls you home, redeems. It longs its legion vast, or some stay tribes. To gauge what's exception nature as the rest. To gain, to see, then to have all the parts, to discern, to use. What is hyper positive? Always unto itself. So, in other words, if one part of one person is really positive unto itself, positive unto all parts of yourself, and if you're positive unto all parts of yourself, really, per its system, you're positive unto everyone else. It's a species identity of body. It's because the individual can only be a semi-nature one way. Where from inside itself, what appears to be what is simultaneously its identity of relation, its identity of volume as a hyper volume, the only one that all share as a hyper simultaneous nature, where volume equals value as nature / nature as value, as identity. So it is important to understand how there is an obfuscation of simple A and B, therefore B, positive and negative treatments, where and how we are syntax nature. And it's, for example, is critical, is criminally foreign influenced, but self-valued roles with it. For example, a trick to get people to perceive the words in the dictionary as values rather than as identities of volume / hypervolume. And for example, there are other motivations, natures, needs, interests for this. Individually grouped and together. Before we could treat that right, before and while that was sophistication / non-sophistication and collusion, the motivations for it were really per uses of the other identity, the ground locations, per the one use of it. this works the same way computers have to work, and with instances and exceptions, exception nature. So they can't do it the way nature does it. No one could mimic the way it is exception nature, as where and how, as one identity of volume. It is a plurality of volumes, or it is volume slash volumes rather, as a quality of hypergeneration, of self-generation. And so we as it must be, auto creator, each. So women and men are forced to fight. And so women and men are forced, and it's sustained. And it's through the education inclusion, but differentially too. Because the overt criminal enterprises in the private and a whole bunch of different countries and our own simultaneously are kept needing to hide the same sequence of finite progressive lives, time, motivations, other than actual means to get away with it. Time, right there, provided for them. We have to deal with the identity theft / fraud method that replaces and consciously knew through time. These are people still using where and how they confess, demonstrate, and record roles with the overt criminal enterprises and the private ones, and the interbranch with it, as their and how the interbranch family members have roles with it, and the overt criminal enterprise. How they confess this on campuses and off campuses, connected to instances, treatments at the locations like campuses, and private database relationships simultaneously, ones that have nothing to do with ones, and ones people don't realize connected to our schools, Harvard Hospital, and then further with a Trinity, with a Institute of Living, has a whole bunch of men and women involved with a whole bunch of different countries like Afghanistan and like Korea and Italy or Sicily, with the DeMoro family and with the Kerr family, and with their roles with teachers I had, and like with the middle school involved with identity theft, fraud, slander. They put a girl they abused in a class with me in a middle school. I never saw that Heather Hansen, Joe DeMoro, or Ray Clough on my middle school campus ever. I saw one exception real fast with Joe DeMoro, and it was with an Eric Mendez, who I also never had a class with. I never saw him there except for that one exception, which is recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, having been set up because of his roles with identity thefts and frauds and wire crimes with Wethersfield Police. On and off the Wethersfield Police Department, their roles with falsified police reports, on and off campuses, behind my back, from other classrooms, identity theft, fraud, slander roles, has something to do with their additional police extensions of types of police, their involvements with on and off Fox Connecticut News and the buildings in downtown Hartford, and a bunch of relativity has to do with the state capitol, and to the lawyer of Robert Chever, the lawyer's office. I don't know if it's still there, with Robert Chevery, which is down the street from where Harriet Beecher Stowe, Mark Twain house is. Also, people all along Route 3, and where and how they exploit housing locations, like in Rocky Hill, near that golf course. They have people that involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, with the intelligence community, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed by Wethersfield Police, involved also with switching names, forging names, roles with them, with people further involved with a child abuser, and with forensics locations through time involved with child abusers, involved with families that answer phones for police and for news media, involved with identity theft, fraud, slander, attaching me to fake words, my family. They force people to speak as groups per a method where they use time simultaneously, too fast, too slow, to get over on the quality of fact-cheating nature. That would have used free speech to explain what was the problem with both the sides that were trying to counter the fact-cheating nature qualities, trying to counter Jim Crow laws, and those trying to explain it. Measured and maintained, sickly, distinctly victims of a breaching method. Everyone already having blamed what the breaching method causes and caused on other things, others, ourselves, and that already having been exploited by a whole bunch of other uses by the breaching method /S. So through everybody's own apparent motivations, nature, needs, interests. So everyone couldn't explain where and how that quality of criminal insidiousness is self-valued with the opinions A through Z. So they've been setting up instances by influencing acting at locations to keep people locked at each age of fact-cheating nature, incapable of being honest about the past, incapable of being honest about the present, and so incapable of being honest enough to afford the discernment of the future's values here, of its identity here. Forever nature is making more of itself from that which is already made, which is its identity of relationship to itself, gaining to gain its volume. That's the value of that. And this is also discernible through how it is functional, again, as the hypervism. But this is about theory. Theory's theory. Notice, so they put into our syntax nature, into our communications with each other, the notions about what, theories about what, and convictions and physical, what's his name, with the theory of evolution, not all these theories, evolution, Darwin, but the other guy with the theory of relativity. In our faces, our founders left us to free speech so we could demonstrate how the actual identity of relativity, that which is also the identity of the hyper-simultaneous, how we could demonstrate it was prevented, anybody was prevented free speech quality, and they were forced to pretend other at all locations, sickly distinctly, at all interbranch locations, sickly distinctly. Further, and see, that was while it was being sustained, the breaching method, those locations, they knew it would need to hide from and hurt and value hurt and being or having been hurt. Each age of correlation nature is actually inherent, active, progressive means. So instead, they have overt criminal enterprises and the interbranch for kids, and all exception nature tied to them, even military inclusion and even medical community. See, there are medical community involved with all kinds of natures of organized crime and drugs and medicines crimes. That's the only people that counter, because those locations are involved with their methods and natures of organized crime. Because they are, and with the branch of government and the overt criminal enterprises and private ones, which are actually recorded as how they are kept with their patients and criminals and against innocent people, rolls with identity theft, fraud, slanders, falsified police reports, rolls with stacking arrays of people of opinions and collusion against just with sequence shifts against anyone to get, because they have to keep hid their roles with what has been hurting everyone leading up to and in the World Trade Center attack, even some because we had some roles with it. Our side had it. They have, we have to address the delusions that are juxtaposed with the criminally foreign influence, factual nature, qualities, and convictions manifest as the voices with identity ground locations associated with our communications, either human communications, because those locations have been involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders of that method that is specifically to keep us from discerning how nature is wanting and need us to use, how we are syntax nature, how we are function nature, how we are to explain what an array is about. Well, we were supposed to explain what, in other words, with instances, what, in other words, I don't know what array. I was thinking about, we see every once in a while, I don't know which channel I saw it on through life. I've seen like people speak about the FBI or police and they say, oh, well, and then like they came through some kind of class and they teach about behavior, like how to interpret who's lying and things like that. They've been roles with sequence shifts, with offensive evidence reception racketeering, worse than war crimes since founding. And it is manifest when people with people's fact-checking nature, their fact-checking nature qualities, when they make opinions about slavery, about the relevance of all the revelations tied to treatments of black, good or bad. They are both being used to prevent what is increasingly relevant, increasingly valued to discern, which is the breaching methods needs by it then and now. It knew that it was going to have to hide its identity of relationship to all locations now, then, before our founding parents were even born, before England was even born as England. How you doing? How you doing, John? Happy New Year, everybody. This is about Happy New Year, John. This is about theory. So they replaced in our syntax nature. They put the theory of relativity, and they put it mixed with physical delusions and criminally foreign influence, fact, human nature, quality. So when humanity and where and how we need to use the actually functional, but actual identity of relativity. So things have identities of relativity individually grouped and together even. This is how and why we're individual group species identity of volumes. So but we have the theory of relativity maintained formally, collusion at all locations of evidence perception, data perception, quote, facts, unquote, perception. So increasingly too, sequence shifts, illusions, self-value roles, and identity theft, fraud, slander method that to keep that the identity we are with and as Native Americans, Native pure together, and self-valuing if their rights or our rights as Native Americans. You know, we're not Native Americans. We could discern that their rights, people confess that they are in collusion with the breaching method against Native Americans, against the Constitution unabridged. People confess that they are in collusion with with the illusions, where and how that people don't pretend they don't when they pretend passions and emotions by sciences. Or after they responded to other people's their uses of other people's names, they blame it on their emotions. Those are the people who are offensively preventing strangers from using others' names. They don't even know what they're putting themselves in our business and stealing us to fake words to hide that after the fact. So WFSB has roles with Marines and Rocky Hill that are involved criminally foreign influenced with people from Korea and people from other countries, a whole bunch of different ways too. But one of the roles they have instances commonly with is identity theft, fraud, slanders that also connect with illusion, self-value that those instances roles that also all trace back to to campuses I went to, and to kids that were used criminally for an influence. I mean, kids that were used by men and women who were using everything, just to do whatever per off campus is influenced, but then through other motivations, nature's needs apparent, extra, you know, evil and good, real motivations for people through time. Role relevant to roles with the identity theft, fraud, slander method. In other words, this is relevant to where and how New York City, the real causes of that trap, where and how they don't even tell American history true. And because they want and need they want and need to blame other things, others, ourselves, when the kids react to where and how they simultaneously pretend to be for their education while they demonstrate, confess, record they're in collusion with the men and women who demonstrate, confess, record self-valued roles, where and how, for example, is what is actually communicated, even in relationship to black and white treatments that leave out the breaching method. They're blaming other things, others, themselves. They're pretending that people of each age, nature, and location don't have means by inherent active and progressive that we do. So they have readings of laws and statutes that gave and give precedence to the benefit of the doubt to people at the last second at locations. And that's one of the things that they've been exploiting, where and how those locations are also more involved with they've been fabricating audio and video. American history is about that breaching method that would keep all locations, areas, and states. And new nature was going to keep us manifest needing to be able to communicate with and as a judicial branch manifest, a political body manifest, and an executive body manifest, and an exception nature manifest, like military, like prisons tied to them, like their state offices. So the Connecticut State Judicial Branch offices and Connecticut prison offices and locations next to them, like houses next to them, and uses of that were our roles with the World Trade Center attack and with predicate acts that WFSB recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. Roles also with people through that live with the location that are from Wethersfield that also have roles with the locations in Rocky Hill. And they sequence shifts and pretend lies about their motivations, because the motivations are also haven't been relevant, because they've been planting evidences at locations with wire crimes as roles with various natures of courts crimes. Various natures of cases where killers, child abusers, and the courts themselves and the prisons themselves, they've been kept, their family members too, kept needing to hide shared uses of locations with their involvements with identity thefts and frauds and slanders, relevant to where and how all that has been that has been extended from where and how they maintained, and they measure and maintain self-value. Other being told as the short words of American history, and where and how it can and should be defended with passions and emotions. That is prevented by people pretending passions and emotions and using premises treatments reliant upon other people's fake things they said and pretended and or valued, pretended into databases, said at locations, etc. Oh, let's solve it in court. Those courts have been criminally foreign influence. Victims, but victim predators. What is witch trials about? See, this is complete remote possession of all identities of sophistication. Hi, John. Hey, are you here still here, John? You guys left. I forget. I didn't respond. But people, theory. Don't let them replace. And so think about this now. I should have done this right up in front of what I meant. Theory, where they have the theory of relativity used to measure and maintain, not just not discerned, but how exploited, not discerned, the actual identity of relativity / hyperrelativity too, even. And that has a relativity to our fact-sheeping nature. When we're going to speak as people, informal or any kind of context, about the parts of American history that are critical, individually grouped and together, that are we're going to debate the significance of such. So they already painted themselves in corners, pretending passions and emotions, and that was already used relevant to where and how. They use the names of Science Abridged, the names of their members, to speak for the sciences, to have them speak as experts, just to have them speak. The people that have been, how they've been trained to bring and use time treatments at locations, areas, and states has been measured and maintained. Simultaneously, too fast, too slow, used to get over on forever nature, correlation nature, actually inherent, active, progressive means. And per answer / S proper, capable of being proper regarding class placements, for example. See, there are off the records things that they know formally, but there was also off the records per that method that was sophistication. Sophistication here since before them. So they've been attaching little kids. We can't leave off the off campuses part, because that's the worst part. And that was no one's fault. But that was self-valued by the parts where there is the on campuses parts. And it's also, thank God, sometimes there means to say thank God, but in other words, thank God, nature will demonstrate negative value, nature progressions, acts, and natures if a system employs those laws that worse than colonization, forced as the nature of colonization. It forced it with the foundation of England, tactically abridged. Can't even remember the history of English proper. Complete, it at all locations, areas, and states are criminally foreign influence, positive treatments, and negative treatments and collusion. You think justice spoke. You think some have woke, but some have not. But where is truth to ask by? In other words, all I have to do is fix the fake news. They're making me and others. They need to get on paper because of how they've been. What's actually recorded is where and how they force people to be and think as groups, and because they've been faking people to fake locations, fake natures and ties to other people through time. So remember, I don't even think I ever saw Ray Cololo and Rick Cianfaglione hanging out together, except for one time when I was a kid. One exception. Note that, because these are some of the names involved with New Britain Superior Court, Hartford Courts, Middletown Courts, people involved with that, further with the principal child abusers campus, and other campuses and houses next to it, and people on and off Central Connecticut State University, on and off Trinity College involved with predicate acts with people also. It has something to do with their roles with spots next to the state capitol and their roles with timed identity theft, fraud, slanders. And with this O'Brien family, with connections tied to that. They have little kids steal the identities of others, pretend through other motivation, and it sounds later like we know them. Their identity theft, fraud, slander roles again, too. It's relative to where and how we are syntax nature. And nature wants and needs us to be speaking about and using words like value in nature and identity and sequence value and theater. How could they speak for theater? They need to get new acting coaches too. The branches of government, they need to be re-educated, everybody, because you had the short words and revelations of American history. We have to understand the extortion of our founders, the identity theft, fraud, slander method against them and everyone, sickly distinctly. So American history begins with understanding that method that divided to employ Native Americans, A through Z, hurting themselves and or blaming other things, others, or ourselves, even when correctly. Blaming it the way the breaching method wanted and needed. Otherwise, it's just going to attach everyone to fake words anyway. Many pray about the law and failed. Campus mercies rise here. So no one's here now, so nothing must be. Don't be afraid to appear, YouTubers. Here, who disbelieves? They filled your mind with theories in the place of what relieves. See injunctive reliefs. Suspend your disbeliefs. Ye legion, hear your name. Legion, hear. Religion, 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 legion, tribes, exception nature. Yin yang and alpha and omega. See, humanity is one volume that will not part and only fill. Men and women are two there. We are parted. We are two distinct bodies. Mother and father are two distinct bodies. As exceptions in exception nature that are simultaneously in demonstration of how exceptions in exception nature is relevant to where and how. One identity of volume is a semi-nature as an exception, where and how it is forever nature. More and more of one to infinity being made as the value of each individual, a forever nature, an identity, a simultaneous nature / sequence nature, as a quality of diffusion. Here. She means appear. So in other words, to New York City, this is how we're going to move. We have to gather here. We have to have me found. I'll gather around vaccines and pamphleteers. As soon as we start, it will help every other city in the world, in America. The New York book comes with the American Nook. In states to states. Each river bend, each brook, each thing is boxing. So we have countless space locations for better than free. that we have leaders who are better than love to go like that and enable for New York City. If one of you follows what I say, two, you'll be able to counter properly and completely what actually led up to the World Trade Center attack in that context and since too. And actually be able to counter properly war. So while they have manifest these groups and reactions to them, they are in collusion against the individual finite voice because they're keeping the sciences abridged. Pretend all kinds of instances, formal and informal, people pretending self-valuing nonsense, not real premises, names of science people, like Einstein, theory of relativity in place of the science of relativity, volume science, juxtapose physical delusions with Einstein. I don't even have to read it. We're not being led by what is the identity of relativity and actual, in the short words again of American history, which is relevant too because they have where and how English is supposed to use, where and how science is sharing an identity, and where and how that is manifest, where the identity of relativity takes where it has subjects, has the group, how the subjects are grouped, brought up. For example, when people bring up how the breaching method, when they bring up slavery, they're bringing up how the breaching method employed that sick to slavery against every single person of humanity, also sickly distinctly labeled, free and slave, exactly the way it needed it to have defended insidious natures of positive treatments and negative treatments and identity treatments and collusion as this particular method of identity theft / fraud / slander. It is as a quality of fact treatment nature being said that is greater than and more finite than what the law would say is the value of identity theft, fraud, slander. But then, as it's their value too, it also accords with that definition of identity thefts and frauds. But see, those locations associated with countering such have been all different natures of crimes, for example, have been in collusion with uses of the juxtaposed natures of abuses of each age of fact should be nature, specifically relevant to where and to how manifest our identities of reactions and of reaction nature, to where and to how fake integrity of law and of justice pretends and pretended passions and emotions, and to where and to how that is relevant to where and how at little kids' campuses, the interbranch family members pretend and foreign countries and private criminal enterprises and just legalize ones. All uses of identity ground locations, perception, the time, our value progression is exploited relevant to where and to how the short words and revelations and proper, and per the protraction of short words and uses of what is hyper evidential. So a person could go into a court if they were enslaved and say, okay, I want this. You guys are not honest. Now there's America. We want freedom. They knew that it would be that type of logic, and we'll be able to see how that wasn't there. So we'll be able to discern how the breaching method was involved. So it had to force the same thing our founders had to force another way, which is the North and South to fight about slavery. The breaching method set that fight up by putting slavery sickly distinctly in the North and sickly distinctly in the South, and forcing roles with it sustained as slaves. Complete remote possession of their premises treatments, fact treatments. If they said they put other into the database anyway, and that's recorded self-valued, being and having been self-valued. That's what is read to our kids. And they pretend on a mass scale that they perceive others to be making theories. They're preventing writing their roles at locations with other natures of evidence planting. Increasingly, in other words, so they can bring things before courts that are a whole bunch of names, ties to them and their family members, everything like that. All kinds of instances kept needing to hide the same sequence of fine active progressive lies where people repeat what they said or know, and they have to hide that. They have to hide from what they are shown with things that come before them. They are even shown preemptively where they're going to need to hide things by hurting strangers, by using their roles with instances where they're supposed to deal with strangers. So in other words, we have investigators that are criminally foreign influence, but differentially, as a certain kind of victim predator, specifically for the fact, human nature defenses of their identities. For example, they pretend we're saying things bad about police when we are speaking about particular acts that are bad by them and methods that are bad by them and things about their nature that are bad by them, dishonestly, because of their roles in cases also being and having been exploited, that are differentially criminally foreign influenced. So people are mean to the police dishonestly, and the police are dishonestly to people. Differentially criminally foreign influence, the people and the police. But increasingly, both the overt criminal enterprises, private ones, the police, everything else, everyone's collusion against anyone who wants to use integrity that's not trying to use people's names and titles. Just stay on the sequence shifts. It's going to hurt police and overt criminal enterprises in all the other countries more by hiding such roles with such and such names. I don't know the names of the men and women from Korea associated with the Taekwondo place near where the Wethersfield Police is now and where they used to be. Or they used to be there, I guess. But there's also a place near, I don't know if they're still there, but there's a place in Rocky Hill also. And there are places near there with a whole bunch of people from Rocky Hill and Wethersfield involved with military, foreign and domestic, with identity thefts and frauds. Again, relative to this method that we have to be able to speak about it as individuals. That's how we could overcome it. It's all right to speak as a group, but speak as individuals on paper, as individuals, when using other people's names. So they've been painting arrays to collusion. Yeah, witch trials. Then they pretend that we're using the president's name. That's additional. And I was using it since before the president said it. And he was educated on that before I was born, probably. But when they bring up witch trials, they leave out how the witch trials place in Wethersfield, Connecticut, is right next to where George Washington had to leave, slavery entrenched in the North America. We don't know this because measured and maintained, what our founders left us to correlate, the breaching method wipes away and measures and maintains self-value through our own, per its method /S, having been sustained. All these methods, there is a complete order by them. This was sophistication here since before our founding parents were even born. This has each identity of sophistication. In England, they can't even remember English properly. And they leave out when they speak for American history how that's hyper evidential about what there are revelations. English was revealed at a time, the other languages revealed at a time that came from before criminally foreign influences, sciences had been self-valued. And so, since they have been self-valued ever since nobody could afford discernment of where and how the electrical engineering of language and of humanity really works. You jerks. So you to other tell. Boxings to break your spell, we fight. But by the rules. Yeah. So, see means appear. So one of the things the pamphleteers will be about. See, once we get moving as we're training, New York City, we're going to mean stack. What works, what doesn't. In other words, we're going to mean stack, but we're not just going to. We're going to start with the most forsaken locations. We're going to mean stack from there. Let's all prepare. In Connecticut, Governor Lamont, please help. Please let us do this. We want in any state too. If you guys agree to give locations, and have them have food and they won't have to worry about being, in rain or cold. If we could make a whole bunch of locations, wouldn't be anything on them. So we could bring a nature of relief /S for the people of New York City that are in a trap, while we are simultaneously engineering ourselves as a hyper agency capable of being the quality of fact, human nature, to be at the other end of weapons pointed at each other as our species identity of volume, without the integrity of voice of the law and other having been pretended at the other end of the nuclear weapons. The problem. Can't see the value of being able, of the overtly distinct breaching method employed uses of word black relative to the forsaken locationally, logistically, the ground's identity of relationship to itself, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, as our human volumes, as those short words and their revelations, increasingly replaced. That's grace. What increasingly is replaced. All pace, all train. There is one way to win the wedge revolution, will complete, to silence wars. their way. Humility pray. We're still on the tactically denatured ground since before our founders were even born. All gathered around boxing to teach our things, to teach us things to move our souls. Boxing. Greetings. Oh, sounds boxing. We have to win the revolution. Every country, modern countries, evidence is when they make opinions about what history is about. So you guys, once I get someone in New York to hear me and start paying attention, we'll start delivering the pamphleteers and other people will spread what we're going to do. Then we can start stacking down the means. One way redeems. My things down, my computer program. Otherwise, I would have Little Rap Guy episodes to help explain this. Because Little Rap Guy and friends there's an episode with it's counter obfuscated. Because the breaching method has uses for the people, for the locations where the people are people stacked upon. It also has uses for the self-valued roles with the logic against everyone's self that are forced from the campuses that I need to pretend other. Roles with use of that I need to pretend other. So they need to pretend, theater by education. By theater, they have to value theory in the place of science. In the place of, in other words, of premise, treatment is proper. Theory, formally corrupt and informally, increasingly self-valuing at all locations. Nations each. So thank you. Have a great night, everybody. And New York book, The Bros Look, it comes. Don't waste time when we start moving because it will make the American book. If America and Connecticut, even if Connecticut made all these locations, we could bring reliefs. And we could have in communication, in other words, we could change the nature of relationship between everybody. We could make it easier to discern the nature of the law's actual voice, your souls. Republic's campus returns. In other words, there's one Little Rap Guy and Friends cartoon episode where Sepp and Reeves are standing outside of a big, tall project building. They call it the project, whatever they call it. Know how they call it project. Project. Our school will have projects. See, but this will own the way itself, too. See, but it leads. The rest precedes. These have ideas. I tell you best and long. Come on. I'm not a doctor. I'll delineate their delusions from their criminally foreign influence premises treatments with the courts that have been using tricks, pretending to perceive that people need to have faith in their doctors. For example, offensively, fabricating audio and video, identity thefts and frauds, roles stacking fabricated audio and video into those databases as their collusion with actually what happened at locations. So further their roles with that identity theft / fraud / slander method that has even good people colluding with complete strangers with the worst natures of things, boxings. I tell you things. Also, per the uses of the lie progressions with the identity theft / fraud from the youngest campus, how they connected through time. Control your mind. So people from Trinity College and from Central Connecticut State University are involved with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and with various natures of courts involved with predicate acts on and off those campuses and on and off campuses, intercities, with people also timed on and off my street involved with predicate acts with the Wethersfield police and those other police forms and courts criminally involved, therefore timed intercities with planting evidences crimes. And that's also relevant to it as their roles and their natures of roles as their natures, where they are, how it is discernible how they are recorded relevant to their roles with fabricating emails with New Britain, Connecticut News, and uses of their roles with crime methods involving the companies that place ad placements on the news channels that have involvements with child abuses and the other natures of organized crime relative to the lies and illusions they told while attaching me and others to fake words, and as their roles with falsified police reports and officers forging and switching names, and preventing a response to by putting charges and no writing and confessions tied to that regarding the switching and forging names. Because at different locations, they're telling different things in the databases too. Oh, so there's also a Joshua Julian, who's one of the ones recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved on and off the campuses and on and off my street with identity thefts and frauds with, the foreign and domestic too. These are people involved with overt criminal enterprises and with other natures of sick things. As too, as people that may try and make exceptions to pretend to know you with the complete strangers like this Joshua Julian, involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders with against little kids, making confessions about as roles recorded with Facebook and where they used to spread lies with fake news, Connecticut news media since I was a baby, involved with federal criminals since proven dirty police forms corruption and collusion. Also, they don't like to talk about it because there's a whole bunch of other countries that are keeping and having kept at the outcome/s. So they have something with the businesses next to the Taekwondo place with names that know my name from Rocky Hill and people associated with Mike Roberts, and they're associated with Korea and people with airlines and with the World Trade Center involved with identity thefts and frauds and intercities connected to it. It's something to do with the roommates of Ray Cololo too, involved with in some place in Newington and with people in Southington and Plainville, with the intelligence community involved as the ones criminally foreign influence, also on off some car dealerships involved with identity thefts and frauds instances, roles with and names that are on and off Hartford Hospital triage 3 times, involved with a whole bunch of people associated with Brendan Leahy and his father, Brendan Leahy, and women in their family, and a Lombardo family/S involved, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed with drugs and medicines crimes, untimely deaths with foreign and domestic nurses and doctors, other natures of, so we have corrupt, also delusions wrought. Don't make sure you get a response for the Leahy family pretended conversations with me and with my family about legal cases they were involved with through time, and with this Joshua Julian, with the lies he was spreading on Facebook. We have the Facebook page with the Wethersfield Police and other police forms of the executive branch. And there are people with the New Britain Superior Court Facebook page with a KNERR. And there was an officer, Jerry Miller, also one of the ones further on the north side of my house, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with various natures of crimes, with evidences, crimes, fake spreading lies about me growing pot on and him pretending he recorded it on my porch, and his roles with there's a fire department, but he also confessed roles with the Kerr family. That is also one of the families that went out of their way to pretend to know me and to plant fake evidences, lie about where I was going and coming from. a number of times, and we're like, how actually I came to those. In other words, and in other words, there were also as roles with overt criminal enterprises with their brothers, and their roles with the policing at the shopping centers, and their roles with people that were planting fake things into databases at schools I went to, and then progressively because they needed to hide live progressions. It's something to do with Rob Heimgartner liked a poem I wrote for my mother on Mother's Day. He said he wished he could write a poem like that. I don't know if he told the teacher or something like that, and it upset the mayor Gold because he was pretending passions and emotions in the background because he had already been affecting progressive lies and identity thefts and frauds and slander roles for his roles with confessing, demonstrating, and recording men and women involved with differentially criminally foreign influence branches of government and with fake care, and as their roles preventing people from telling about how that's evidence, how Black rights are ignored, how Native American rights are ignored, distinctly from our own, but you lose the means to do that when they make it personal by taking away your right and needs to speak about the three branches of government unobstructed. See, they by demonstrating, confessing, and recording collusions on and off campuses time. See, also the corners of the street have something to do with the sense and sensibilities of how Russians and Americans are bound and not bound by the breaching method, distinctly from how we are bound and not bound as individuals grouped in species as nature system, by our value, by our why and how we are syntax nature. See, now it's all additional ways, ulterior from the ways pure. So, vaccines for sure. So volume science. The dictionary is about volume science. It is about the identity of relativity science. Volume theory and volume science, critical race theory, for example, there are fronts offensively to science, scientific method, that which is actually recorded offensively. Then we wanted to, or you're going to debate. They want us to debate a theory. They want us to debate what is not an actual premise. It's not a legitimate premise. They have been pretending to believe things about the passions and emotions of YouTubers, of people on Facebook, the news media. And proofs of this is because their nature that will just attach people to fake words and locations, fake ties to other people, fake natures of ties to other people, including doctors, including little kids, faking them ties to doctors. And they're preventing me a response. I can't do work until I do this. They have Connecticut boxing gyms. They have, it's not, I can't ask them for help. In other words, countering what the courts and they influence, and they have people from like the military from my town involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders against me, and with the identity ground locations next to the state prison offices and state judicial branch offices, relevant to where I'm trying to teach you guys how they're showing the same way computers work, the locations inside the microchips, the millions of locations inside the CPU. When when something happens, something's positive, the identity has to sense it, note it. Greetings. Greetings, Ron. 1 jar of melted marshmallows, 10 ounces of milk, 1 cup of butter, 5 cups. What does that make, Ron? What does that cook? What is that, Rice Krispies treats? Right? What does that make, Ron? I don't know what that makes. Vaccines, predicts, cook the food. So I was gonna do a cooking video. I don't know what to make. I try to make it hard to hold the camera at the same time and cook something and make something. And then I keep having computer. I'm gonna make it some things. I'll make it for you. I'll make it for you people. I don't know what to make. I think I'm gonna make with something what people don't think about making, like squid. I just because that's fast, right? I don't know. They say you're supposed to smash it on the rock. I don't know if that makes a difference. They have one recipe that I tried to make on YouTube. I couldn't do it though. I have to get it was carbonara, pasta carbonara or something. They make it look so good, creamy, but I didn't mix it right. The guy was warning the whole time about that. I don't know. I set the camera down somewhere and show the food, the camera. I love to watch. I'll make something, or maybe I'll make a sauce. But I don't know what to. I made this pasta carbonara. I saw it on YouTube, and I watched all these different people make it, and I was getting so hungry. Then I finally got it because it's like there's I forgot the name, with bacillo or something. If you don't have that, you can use there's like some pancetta. But this recipe, I made some mac and cheese earlier, was nice, but next time I'll do whatever cheddar flavor. Val, you ever try like the package, the Velveeta package, or the Elbows macaroni package recipe for baked macaroni? Is pretty good. Or if you do, you know what the secret of it? If you do a baked macaroni, or what is that? The mac and cheese in a box with the orange cheese. If you make a little sauce with that little cheese, and you put a couple pieces of white processed cheese, so it becomes like a white / orange cheese sauce, and then you mix that, it comes nice. It makes it more like homemade. You made pretty. So the Kraft macaroni and cheese and Roman noodles, those guys. You get that and you could go in a 7-Eleven. They have that. So we have all the means to make evolution's fruits and gifts means out of nowhere. We have to enable the ground and those means apart from it and or having admitted not having been apart from a criminally foreign influence system. And that was forced. Self-valued roles were forced by the breaching method, not by our founders. There are exceptions that appear to be in demonstration of other, but they're really in demonstration of the same thing. We can only understand this by using that. See, the people that know the most about American history are going to get over on us. They're like the tree of knowledge and good and evil, and the tree of life. See, this is theory. But while I'm waiting, because in other words, or while everyone's waiting for a response, because they'll never give one of why and how they hid so long. The first part of the Old Testament is all you have to understand is right up to here where it's about science, where the sciences and people of the sciences will come together. The sciences share an identity of relativity too. That is differentially, individually grouped in language. When they make crazy laws by the breaching method or whatever, like with slavery or the torture part of it. We have to understand it as an identity of volume, separate from the identity of volume and its identity of relationship to itself as the torture with that simultaneously, though, but separate, additional to it. And the identity theft, fraud, slanders, and self-value rolls with it, additional to it, because the breaching method was using self-value rolls with it, which we know the breaching method also made self-value. But we also know those self-value roles were through other instances, other motivations, natures, needs, interests, instances of using others' names, no. So this is how our identity of value progression actually works and is being exploited by a breaching method that already perfected itself and is being exploiting everyone there too. Here, there, everywhere. I think the Testament is about. I interpret it as cipher / decipher. I interpret it as an archaeological evidence, but I also interpret it as archaeological evidence. In other words, the stewards of the religions are still at locations, criminally foreign uses of criminally foreign influence premises treatments, fact, human nature, qualities, and aspects. For example, their roles and relevance and reactions to the child abuses with the church. Real or made up, that reported, because it is also demonstrable where and how sane interpretations of religion are being and having been prevented at those locations, and at the locations counter to that in collusion. So, in other words, they have theories that they're pretending are science, but they're also juxtaposed with delusions and defenses of themselves as names, times treatments, other people's names treatments. And in other words, and subjects treatments that leave out exceptions and exception nature. They leave out all that is not by accident because they're replacing what is actually recorded with those physical delusions. Their own. And while they're pretending other people have physical delusions, for example, regarding color, little kids can discern that and how the government, the branches of government individually grouped in together are confessing, demonstrating, recording their roles, criminally foreign influence, when people say the wrong things formally regarding what slavery was about. And the breaching method put everyone blaming racism instead of itself. So it could keep employed, measured, maintain self-value, role screening, keeping what it needs to hide, blames on other things, others, ourselves. And then that's self-defended. And that's already being and having been applied for those instances. All instances with ourselves are being and having been applied by the breaching method. Then further, through other motivations, natures, needs, interests here. Also abridged. And so that longing, common native course, it means never assessed. At the best, boxings, New York things, return. Nature's course, the timeless means, please learn. Connecticut will help. Now, happy Hartford would be to have to accept and help New York. Help us, do a spring cleaning. Have some guests. The governor's going to give them, have them catered. Help those, we're going to speak about, we're going to help each other. New York will help some Hartford kids. There are more bad things than there are the weak streets in New York. There are only like 300 streets in New York. I mean, in Hartford, Connecticut. They're like 300 something streets, you know, and look at the numbers of people getting shot. All kinds of bad things happening every day. All kinds of litigation. People go to jail. Before they go to jail, they were victims. Intercampuses and innocent people still going to jail since founding, pounding drums. Ah, yeah. Yeah. So in other words, we have to get them. The people who moderate the Facebook pages of judges and prosecutors or whatever on you, the people who moderate the Facebook pages of YouTube and of Twitter. Twitter, they've been, in other words, Twitter is involved with some interbranch family members and military with some upskirt photos. Has something to do with it as their roles with military police, with roles with the World Trade Center attack, and with the investigators of it, which is also relevant to the roles with wars leading up to it and since. They have some Afghanistan families associated with Trinity College that Joshua Stryker, they said, is involved with them with predicate acts, also identity thefts and frauds against me on and off Trinity College and other campuses I went to behind my back. He's telling lies about me. And not to my face, I don't know him. Facebook. So but yeah, but they have retired and standing interbranch and people associated with such exception dates are tied to them. They share the database. On one level, they share databases, information, and self-value uses of it that are criminally foreign influenced since before the computers, those database relationships and their uses of it, per another use that has those uses needed for its own use, those to screen itself, and appear to be other motivations. Its remote uses of all identities of sophistication and of non-sophistication and collusion against each and through responses to it. So I try to respond right, or if someone tries to respond right, they attach to fake words, locations. They collude further with instances at law locations. They make us bring up the names of other people because of how the foreign and the domestic collude at locations, and where and how it's evidence, perception, racketeering, worse than war crimes. It's evidence, including fact, human nature-oriented predicate acts, delivery system methods, roles. New York is about a predicate acts delivery system souls. I'm not a lawyer. We are going to use what is hyper-evidential regarding how the lawyers were motivated to roles, obfuscating the breaching method by self-valuing their roles apart from branches of government, but also in collusion with their corruption, where and how it was in collusion with the overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and all that other bound and uses of that, as we could discern once we get to dealing with simultaneously, but we haven't been dealing with the simultaneous because the news media through elections has had complete remote possession of agencies of the governments or branches of government individually grouped together and then pretending other, where manifest it actually recorded our methods individually grouped together of pretending other by using all that comes before them and by using other people's names even preemptively for their roles with the identity theft, fraud method, slander method that is relevant to where and how sickly distinctly the people of New York City are hurt intercampuses from the people in Wethersfield and Hartford, for example, and in Rocky Hill, sickly distinctly to keep how sickly non-distinctly from being discerned, to keep how each identity individually grouped it together, all positive and negative treatments, they would have to be self-valued further at locations and then further on off other campuses, even people that aren't even connected, have no connection, and then constantly exceptions to pretend other that they meant they were other, and no one leaves the quality of fact, human nature anywhere to have this discerned. And it was tied to all the bad things and good things that happen other than appears. So the real answer slash S is hard. The only reason it's hard because what is simple has been denied. Short words have been replaced. That the scientists aren't supposed to say or pick, convict, not just opine. Open each mind. Campus Martius rises through the mist. The fist. Vaccines. Okay, thank you. Have a good night. And someone get me hurt by New York City, please. We will start, or any city. Who wants to start? We'll just, we'll put, the pamphleteers. Once I have a voice that's gonna admit, the evidence is the only reason it's gonna work is going to show you how to force reliefs from forced addressed, addressed actual predicate acts against you. Actual acts are going to be told on where you're getting hurt, actual methods hurting you. New Yorkers, Hartford, Wethersfield, people of each age of factory nature, people of the elderly homes, workers of the elderly homes. If you want me to stay, appreciating how you are victim predators, though, don't hide. Don't pretend you can't realize when, where, and how the various natures, like a probate court's associated with you, and the police forms associated with you, and the lawyers associated with the various involved, and the people that worked for you guys relevant to that I know. In other words, that's relevant to the locations next to there, also having been involved with all those natures of bad things against each age, as the people with identity thefts and frauds. Whole bunch of people tied to houses on my street, and I used to live here, as roles with the predicate acts on off Trinity College in CCSU. There's a Terry Cleese, sometimes use the name Cleese, sometimes use the name Terry Lewis. Also on Trinity College, involved with this Joshua Stryker, and I don't know his cousin. They have one exception he made. In other words, it has something to do with Trinity College and pilots, too. And there's something to do with the Oliveri family with Trinity College through time involved identity theft frauds, involved with various natures of predicate acts, and like wire crimes with Wethersfield Police, with the names involved now on my street with them, switching and forging names with their Wethersfield Police Department, and roles with names at the Wethersfield town offices and other elections locations roles, and roles with uses of them pretending that the president had no evidences when he used fake news as an evidence. So they demonstrated to me, strangers, times when I was going to come around corners too. People from a Taekwondo place are associated with the intelligence community, with people with shopping centers in Rocky Hill and Wethersfield and intercities, and people associated with the food bag and locations next to it, with the police farms that have conjunctions to names at Central Connecticut State University, Trinity College, locations in Newington, involved with the intelligence community that was criminally foreign influence, and where and how that was exploited. That is evidence relevant to what they did and do to New York City. I have to show you from, I know the names and people and methods interstates relevant. And these are people also on off the World Trade Center attack locations. So we have the value of that to force, you know, whatever means can be generated by the pamphleteers to be gained as value. And then just, you know, you guys will figure out and we'll agree what you're going to do, where you're going to give it to. You know, I'll guide you what to give it to because it will give it to. It will tell us. People won't tell us. I mean, it's true too that they will, but not for their own initiatives. If they would do it through their own initiative, they will follow sequence shifts. They will report and stop making allegations against people that will try to report things. Stop pretending, you know, and defenses of that are the only way you get away with it. Make sure I get a response for New York City and for Connecticut news. Follow mandated law for them. I'm not going to call them again, and they already fabricated emails and fake letters and roles and fake conversations, fake ties to me to fake ties to others, my family fake ties to others, my family fake ties to me and others. They fake words with me and my family, fake ties to my family with me. These are families I've been doing this with their kids from other classrooms, and they're using their patients and their kids to hide their life aggressions and roles remote possession of elections and of the information and the relevance of it. So something to do on off Paul Manafort Drive and Central Connecticut State University, that CCSU or CNN has a story they did on it, relevant to their roles with sources, criminally foreign influence, and delusions wrought simultaneously, and relevant to that at the locations next to the state capitol in Hartford, and next to the locations next to the newest media locations involved with identity thefts and frauds and uses of exception nature. I only know Mike Pandolf in context he couldn't be honest about. He was recorded planting evidences for people that plant evidences so they could pretend to be perceiving things where and how they've been fabricating audio and video in cases. Various natures of courts are criminally involved, various natures of police forms and lawyers, and roles with offensive evidence reception, data reception, identity thefts, and frauds on those places, formal and informal, and intercampus and on and off them are involved. Also, the corner near, the sides of the schools are also being and having been used by this method in Connecticut that is relevant to what they are doing and haven't been doing in locations, areas in the states. But in New York City, the Bros book will be where we can capitalize on the unity we have perfected through the pamphleteers and the meetings. So we can even get other countries like that that would enable us free flights, free places to live, to visit. Because now we're going to be working for the species identity of volume. None other could, not law, but told to speak other. Same sick way the people get. How could people be like that? Such killers. The same thing, the interbranch kept needing to hide the same sequence shifts, finite active progressive lives with them and their family members and their uses of all locations, corners of the streets, on off campuses together, collusion. Illusion is deep. One of the things fentanyl is one of the new things used to measure and maintain by the breaching method a pseudo sophistication as our identities of the law. and the responses to, for example, and their uses of the qualities of pot. How come the pot is disgusting tasting? That's why it's relevant to how it's disgusting tasting. They've been using a good tasting weed to keep people that are in collusion with the various courts and police forms and people off the state prison offices, off the state judicial branch offices, fabricating audio and video, identity theft, fraud, slanders, roles. They even use that to keep each age a fact, and lying about their motivations for it, lying about their impressions of others to hide how they were offensively rolls with this too, preemptively. Yeah. It goes even back down to, lies told relevant to the roles with criminally influenced things and people, and the interbranch from other classrooms. It affects it. It brought down people, and it made everything positive. In other words, it brought my classmates down. Like Heimgartner, and everyone wasn't natural in that class because of the involvements of the guy, this Mr. Gold, Mayor Gold, and they're wicked racially charged with like there's people that like there's a Paul Zano and a Ray Cole used to always say to a Jew, and that's the only time I ever saw them speaking to each other with stupid inflections in their voices. Now these are people I never saw them hanging around with Rick Sam Faglione. If there's an exception, there's an exception when I was in grammar school, had something to do with there's an O'Brien family is involved with this Colella family and Wethersfield police forging, switching names, falsified police reports, wire crime acts and methods since I was a kid, and uses of them roles. As identity theft, fraud, slander too, relevant to that method, sickly, distinctly hurting everyone specifically. So when we try to speak about it as syntax nature, as names, as locations, voices, we are prevented such by our own vaccines. Come on, I'll train you in New York City upon them P. Just kidding. No, I'll show you. So they have complete sophisticated. They have the complete possession over the people. See how they had the police forms were egging on the people. They say, "Oh, but Trump told us." Trump didn't tell them to do that. He said, "Stand down, stand down." He said, "Stand down. Don't fucking attach me to your fucking criminally foreign influence premises treatments." Is what these motherfuckers. Is what the presidents want to say as chief, but they're not allowed to voice the chiefs. The chiefs don't want to swear, but they don't want the people that swear pretend they can speak for integrity. You think that there was ever integrity to what they call the staff or whatever the goddamn thing is at the White House? You guys can't even use what is hypercorrelated by uses of black yet. You guys self-value others that measure and maintain. Others can't do it for their own reasons. I'll go back to the same reason. The short words were replaced or pays. To Legion, return, begin. Way. Please learn. Vaccines all at once while turn. Please learn. Vaccines. I teach you things. Anthony Wall, USA Boxing. I had a whole bunch of different boxing fights. This video recites live streaming boxing. Does anyone remember me for boxing? I need to get my boxing license, my professional boxing license. It's long been time. So New Britain courts and Hartford courts have roles with people personally and professionally tied to them on Central Connecticut State University, on Trinity College, and locations next to them. On Covington Street in New Britain, They have roles with people connected to the street, Zion Street in Hartford, involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders. They've been planting evidences with courts and prisons clicks, and they train the people that run the prisons interstates with colleges and university systems and with people associated with Central Connecticut State University. Also involved with databases at Sandy Hook, Newtown, and with people with the child campuses there and other natures of campuses like fire campuses, a prison in Sandy Hook, Newtown, and conjunctions to them like forensics locations where there are patients and criminals and people on and off the child campuses and on and off the fire campuses, and the policing of them private are also further criminally being involved and having been involved. Also with the victims and as the reactions to it being used to prevent anyone from telling on what I caught them recorded doing too. And they have so I don't know what it is, but they have these agencies both complete possession like the political parties. So they have the news pretending, using their influence from their sources to pretend that it's legitimate. Just Democrats against Democratic news outlets against Republican news outlets, and that their values treatments, they're pretending not to realize that and how they are involved with exploitations of exceptions to the law, where and how the FBI directors do and don't and didn't have the right to lie, to use the right to lie, where they used it and valued it being having been used before too, where it hadn't, we shouldn't have been. There's also, in other words, for example, in cases, as their roles at collusion with all locations, further and further enter campuses of each age and nature, pseudo sophistication, and the ones that they fight with politically, including as police leaderships. They can't defend themselves and afford what is actually discerned to be countered properly at the same time because they are relied upon its excuses. It's prevention of the revelations by excuses, by exception, nature, etc., etc. So all these people tied to predicate acts with the Wethersfield police also have roles on my street, timed on campuses I went, as the ones further who are involved with identity thefts and frauds from behind my back through life that are also tied to the people on boxing campuses through the time where I stopped, the same time I stopped boxing, I was still boxing. I just didn't, I didn't get my boxing license renewed. It was because of the World Trade Center attack came. And it was really too, because right before that, people had been making confessions and demonstrations relevant to things that went back to my grammar school, and confessions and demonstrations to me back then, relevant to where and to how they prevent the short words and the revelations, that which is hyper evidential, from being used by the fact-cheating nature of little kids to explain American history properly. I could explain it better as a kid in grammar school than they do now, and each age of fact-cheating nature. Yeah, I teach prepare. I could explain other countries' histories better than their countries could too. They left out the self-value roles with the already abridged locations, areas, and states, and countries, alliances, and enemies individually grouped and together, forced by the breaching method, then and while being forced through what they could discern at the same time. So, to free the mind, you must use soul. Maxine, prepare, behold. All we have to do is follow mandated law. They put fake conversations with me about the news media too. They have doctors associated with buildings next to the Fox Connecticut News too involved with this. And further along Park Street and off of Park Street locations in Hartford, Connecticut. And so we're going to map down and start writing a map to people's houses because and we're going to talk about their parents because their parents are involved with the ones that have been preventing me writing because they put lies with the news media, fake emails with the news media, wire crimes with the news media, falsified police reports with the news media, put charges, made confessions, switching names, arresting officer names with the news media. And with the interbranch locations too, switching names at the judicial branch too. Roles with identity theft, frauds, clicks at their also sexual circles, drugs and medicines, crimes, clicks as the police forms like Eric Mendez with some degenerate scumbags at New Britain Superior Court involved with child sexual offenders, identity theft, fraud, slanders, clicks. Also with his family members on off the Wethersfield Police Department, with others like a Dillon family since I was a kid involved 3 times on my street with predicate acts, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with roles with them, with other predicate acts, roles at Hartford Hospital, 3 times people with them. So make sure I get a motherfucking response because you're going to see motherfuckers in Hartford and New York City. You're going to see some sick motherfuckers who pretend they could speak for integrity as the law and as mental health. You watch the sick motherfuckers speaking for the negative value nature, progression, acts, and natures the breaching method is maintaining. And they are maintaining distinctly measured and maintained, blamed on other things, others, ourselves, on yourselves, would hurt you, will prevent your reliefs. So I'll start giving you the reliefs right away. We're going to monetize. You guys figure out how to monetize. Whatever governors do it. In other words, I won't touch the money. I'll show you. Funny feels like games. I'm just kidding. Who trades? Evolution science feels like games. See the people inside in that box with that episode of the projects and with Sepp outside that New York City people stacking with Reeves there. Like our founders, they had to counter extort everyone already extorted by a breaching method, worse than extorted. I'm referring to it as extortion because you don't have the sophistication to appreciate how to counter or to even observe science like volume science. Offensively, volume theory was engineered with physical delusions simultaneously, with formal backings individually grouped and together, people in other countries. Delusions wrought self-value roles with it. But in other words, you have what is actually recorded shows, you have delusions raw, criminally foreign influence mental stewards involved with stacking database, natures of identity theft, fraud, slanders distinctly, but as roles with that method. Remember, we're going to stay on that because nature is functional by how it is value. And the slander is to keep that worse than obfuscated. And the identity fraud is to keep, to keep our system's complete possession being haven't been completely obfuscated, worse than completely obfuscated with the real causes of it and uses of it and motivations, roles. I mean, the relevance of significance, roles, etc. Have a great night, people. Please, New York City, someone get me found for you. Hartford, Connecticut. See, Hartford, Connecticut, New York City alone, we could make spots. Like, in other words, someone will have the people in those people stacking locations. We open up what couldn't be fathomed, but what they couldn't believe, what ourselves couldn't believe. We don't access because we don't realize it. Only because we don't realize it. only because of how and why. So there are exceptions, and there are exception nature, relevant when people make opinions and convictions, but relevant to to economic treatments, relevant to legal treatments by precedents and statutes. Now, the means to observe this requires mandated law to be followed honestly and properly, and that is offensively prevented. We're going to observe this. It is not by accident. There's a method by it. It is a method/S. I tell it best. So this is from off the campuses, and then on and off the campuses already had been sustained since before any of the people that built these online companies had built them. It had each of the sciences individually grouped and together abridged. It's nothing personal. Follow mandated law for everybody. Make sure I get a name, a response. Okay, make sure I get a response. Who denies anything I said about the falsified police reports and the rest with the schools? Make sure I get a response because they attached me to, they lied about what judges said to me, and they lied to judges about what I said too. Make sure, because you're not going to play the games with the judges. You dirty cops with guns too, and sick things, vaccines. I'm going to show you what to do with a dirty cop. I'm going to show you what to do. End quote.